Batman: The Widening Gyre. It is one of those DC stories that lives in infamy because it feels like everything that could go wrong did go wrong. Written by Kevin Smith, a lifelong Batman fan and pop culture icon, the series was supposed to be a heartfelt, character-driven look at Bruce Wayne, letting his guard down again. Instead, fans got one of the most bizarre, tone-deaf, and unintentionally hilarious Batman comics ever printed, and only 6 issues even came out before the whole thing collapsed. The biggest shock is how badly Batman himself is written. In this story, the Dark Knight isn't a master detective or a brilliant tactician. He's a distracted, sloppy mess who constantly screws up. Kevin Smith tries to show a softer Bruce learning to trust again because of Silver Saint, Cloud's return, but instead it makes Batman look unfocused, gullible, and borderline incompetent. He gets blindsided in fights, misses obvious clues, and walks into traps he should have spotted miles away. Fans went in expecting a sharper, more introspective Batman, and walked out wondering who this clumsy, confused guy was. Then there's the infamous toilet moment, the scene that instantly cemented this comic's reputation. In an early issue, Batman gets startled in a fight and literally pees himself. Kevin Smith actually added a line explaining that Bruce keeps backup pants because this happens. That single moment destroyed any chance of readers taking the rest of the story seriously. But things somehow get worse, with Batman's relationship with Silver Saint Cloud. Smith treats their romance like a raunchy college comedy, filling the dialogue with awkward sexual jokes, nicknames, and way too much information about their sex life. The low point is a scene where Batman yanks Silver out of a car by her hair and roughs her up because he thinks she might be a robot. It's meant to show paranoia, but it comes off as disturbing and widely out of character. Instead of showing Batman as emotionally damaged, it makes him look abusive, something fans absolutely rejected. The plot's big twist also backfired. Throughout the series, Batman starts trusting a new vigilante named Baphomet, even revealing his identity to him. If that sounds stupid, it's because it is. Nothing about Baphomet suggests he's stable or trustworthy. And sure enough, in the final issue, Baphomet reveals himself as Onomatopoeia, slits Silver Saint Cloud's throat, and ends the story in a cruel, graphic cliffhanger. Batman's stupidity made the tragedy feel unearned, and the shock value felt like shock for the sake of shock. What really killed the Widening Gyre wasn't just the bad writing, it was how completely it misunderstood Batman. He's written as insecure, sloppy, hypersexual, and emotionally fragile. The story is filled with crude humor, drug jokes, awkward dialogue, and scenes that feel like they belong in a parody rather than a Batman comic. Even Poison Ivy knocking Batman out with weed felt like something out of a stoner movie, not the DC universe. Critics tore it apart, calling it the worst Batman comic ever written, and DC quietly let the rest of the planned 12 issues die off. Convergence. It wasn't a story DC wanted to tell. It was a story DC had to publish because the company was physically relocating from New York to Burbank and needed 2 months of filler. That already put the event at a disadvantage. Fans immediately sensed that Convergence wasn't a grand multiverse epic like Crisis on Infinite Earths or Final Crisis. It felt like a placeholder disguised as an event. Starting from necessity instead of excitement meant readers went in with low expectations, and somehow it still managed to disappoint. On paper, Convergence had a killer setup. Bring back Lost Worlds, Forgotten Timelines, Elseworlds characters, pre-New 52 versions, and make them clash for survival. Easy win, right? Except the main story bungled almost every interesting idea it introduced. Instead of embracing nostalgia, emotion, or character history, Convergence drowned everything in confusing plot mechanics, non-stop exposition, and a villain, Talos, who had all the charisma of a malfunctioning GPS. The event took the biggest toy box ever created and somehow made it feel boring. One of the weirdest things about Convergence is that the tie-in books were actually fantastic. Fans loved seeing pre-Flashpoint Superman, classic Wally West, Kingdom Come characters, old-school Gotham, and forgotten heroes return for small, heartfelt stories. Those issues had charm, nostalgia, and personality, everything the main series lacked. It created a bizarre contrast where the side stories shined while the core event felt hollow. A multiversal event lives or dies on its antagonist, and Talos simply wasn't built to carry a story for this scale. He had no memorable motivation, no compelling personality, and no emotional connection to the heroes or the audience. He wasn't philosophical like Punisher, terrifying like Darkseid, or unpredictable like Superboy Prime. He was just there. Fans felt like they were watching DC try to force a brand new cosmic villain into event villain mode without earning it, and the result was forgettable at best. So Convergence suffered from what many mid-2010s events did. Too many writers, too many last-minute changes, and too much editorial pressure. The story constantly shifted tones, ignored logic, rewrote rules on the fly, and drowned characters in monologues about domes, timelines, brain worlds, and cosmic energy. Nothing felt streamlined, nothing felt urgent, and by the time Daemon, Thanos, Brainiac, and multiple other plot threads got involved, the event already resembled a continuity salad. Fans didn't hate it because it was ambitious, they hated it because it was incoherent. To this day, Convergence is mostly remembered for one positive outcome, the introduction of John Kent, the son of Superman and Lois Lane. Fans adored John, but even they admit he wasn't enough to redeem the events surrounding him. Convergence was supposed to be DC's big multiverse celebration, a bridging point between eras, and a tribute to decades of storytelling. But it felt like a rushed, bloated placeholder that wasted its own potential. The ideas were huge, but the execution fell flat, and it earned its reputation as one of DC's weakest major events. Amazon Attack. It dropped at the worst possible moment, squeezed between Infinite Crisis and Final Crisis, two of DC's biggest, most ambitious events. Anything released in that window was going to get judged harshly, but Amazon Attack had it even worse because it was such a countdown to Final Crisis, a storyline already getting dragged weekly by fans. By the time readers even cracked open issue 1, the hype around it was negative, expectations were low, frustration was high, and the event never got the breathing room it needed to stand on its own. On paper, a story about the Amazons invading Washington DC after Wonder Woman is tortured by the US government could have been a powerful, political mid-story. Instead, the actual execution went off the rails almost instantly. The Amazons weren't portrayed as complex warriors with culture and honor. They were written like mindless murder machines slaughtering civilians, including unarmed men and kids. What could have been a nuanced tale about war, justice, and retaliation turned into a chaotic bloodbath with zero emotional grounding. The biggest complaint fans had was simple. This Wonder Woman event didn't actually feature Wonder Woman. She appears in fewer than 30 pages of a 160-page story. She doesn't drive the plot, she doesn't influence the Amazons, she doesn't resolve anything. Other heroes carry the weight, like Supergirl, Batman, Nemesis, and even Zatanna, with a last-minute spell. So instead of elevating Diana's mythology, the comic sidelines her while claiming to explore her identity as both Amazon and hero. For an event meant to define who she is, it barely lets her speak. And one other thing, fans were furious at how the Amazons were written. Instead of fierce but principled warriors, they were depicted as bloodthirsty xenophobes who kill innocent men for fun, decapitate historical monuments, and attempt to assassinate the US president. Critics called the portrayal racist, sexist, and tone-deaf, leading into tropes about angry men hating women rather than the rich culture Wonder Woman comics had built for decades. For many readers, it felt like DC was attacking the Amazons instead of celebrating them. The event spilled across 7 tie-ins over 4 different titles, and instead of enriching the story, they made it even harder to follow. The tone shifted widely depending on the book, and the plot points appeared and disappeared without cohesion. The event felt like editorial chaos. Some reviews called it homework disguised as a comic because you had to track multiple books just to understand why chimeras, cyclops, and killer wasps were suddenly attacking America. So we, reviewers, destroyed it, forums mocked it, one fan famously boxed up the whole series and mailed it back to DC as protest. The event quickly became a meme for what was DC thinking, and is still referenced as one of the worst big-budget storylines the company has ever produced. Superman at World's End. It came out in 1995, right in the middle of the giant guns, leather, shoulder pads, and grimdark everything era of comics. And unfortunately, the book absorbed every single one of those cliches. We don't get the noble Superman that we are familiar with. The story gives us a scruffy, exhausted, nearly powerless, hermit version of Clark wandering through a futuristic wasteland. The problem isn't that an older, depowered Superman is a bad idea. It's that nothing in the story feels true to him. It reads more like someone tried to turn Superman into a rejected Mad Max character and hoped no one would notice. A post-apocalyptic Superman story can absolutely work. DC has done that many times, but at World's End drowns its own premise in 90s excess. Mutant creatures, robot armies, leather-wearing goons, dystopian grime. The book throws in every trope imaginable with zero subtlety. Even worse, the plot meanders through action scenes that feel like filler, not story. And instead of exploring what Superman means in a ruined world, the comic spends most of its time watching him punch mutants and blood in the shadows. Yes, it's loud and chaotic, but somehow still boring. If there's one thing readers remember about this comic, it's the villains, clones of Hitler. And yes, Superman fights them. It comes across like the writer needed a last-minute twist and grabbed the most cartoonishly evil idea possible. The tonal whiplash from Superman to robots, dystopia, then suddenly Hitler twins is part of why this story is mocked to this day. And one of the most iconic, fundamental aspects of Superman is that he doesn't need weapons. So when this comic gives him a gigantic 90s gun, fans lost it. Superman shooting down enemies with a sci-fi cannon felt so out of character that readers still joke about it decades later. And he doesn't just use guns. He stops feeling like Superman at all. He's joyless, hopeless, and oddly violent. There's no compassion, no moral anchor, no spark of optimism. At the end, after being mortally wounded, he even chooses to die rather than accept being rebuilt as a cyborg. So the story being dark is not the problem. Fans were annoyed because it was dark in a way that erased everything meaningful about the character. DC's Elseworlds line produced classics like Kingdom Come, Red Son, and Gotham by Gaslight. Superman at World's End did not. It's the kind of comic people mention when listing the biggest misinterpretations of Superman ever printed. Between the edgy 90s aesthetics, the nonsensical plot, the bizarre Hitler clones, and Superman swinging around a gun the size of a refrigerator, the book became legendary for all the wrong reasons. All-Star Batman and Robin. On paper, the series should have been legendary. Frank Miller teaming up with Jim Lee, one of the most iconic superhero artists ever. Fans expected a gritty but meaningful reimagining of Batman's early years, but what they got felt like a parody of Miller's worst tendencies. Except he wasn't joking. From the very first issue in 2005, it became clear something was off. Miller's Batman wasn't just dark. He was a full-blown maniac who behaved like he needed therapy more than Gotham needed a vigilante. This Batman is infamous for being crude, violent, and straight-up abusive in ways that even Miller's earlier work never touched. Instead of a brooding protector, he comes off like a sadistic jerk who enjoys hurting people, and not just criminals. The moment that broke the internet forever is his line to young Dick Grayson, "I am the goddamn Batman." The problem isn't that Batman is tough or edgy, it's that this version feels like a guy cosplaying as Batman after drinking 10 energy drinks and losing a bet. He kidnaps Dick, terrorizes him, leaves him alone in the Batcave with no food, and tells him to eat rats if he gets hungry. And the rest of the Justice League somehow ends up even worse. Miller writes Superman like an emotional toddler, Wonder Woman like a cartoonish man-hater, Green Lantern like a useless clown, and Black Canary like a violence-obsessed fanatic. It's like every character had their personality compressed into a single, exaggerated stereotype. Instead of exploring early versions of these heroes, Miller basically drags them through a gauntlet of edgelord caricatures, making each one more unhinged than the last. It becomes hard to tell whether the comic is trying to be serious or if Miller accidentally roasted his own writing style. Jim Lee's art is the one thing everyone agrees is incredible, which almost makes the rest more frustrating. The pages look gorgeous, detailed cityscapes, dynamic action, amazing character designs, but the writing is such a chaotic mess that the visuals feel wasted. It's like watching a blockbuster with Oscar-worthy cinematography, but dialogue written by someone who only learned English 5 minutes ago. The tonal whiplash between Lee's stunning art and Miller's unfiltered writing makes the book unintentionally hilarious. The backlash was huge, and it didn't help that the series barely came out. Issues were released months or even years apart, breaking readers' patience. One issue even had to be recalled because DC somehow missed that Miller slipped an uncensored swear word into the lettering. After 10 issues across 3 years, the series just stopped. No ending, no resolution, nothing. DC later promised a continuation titled Dark Knight, Boy Wonder, meant to wrap things up in 2011, but the project died too. The All-Star line, which was meant to be DC's prestige Ultimate Universe, basically collapsed because of this comic alone. Today, All-Star Batman and Robin is remembered as a weird, fascinating disaster. Some fans enjoy it, but most agree it's one of the worst Batman stories ever published. It took two creators at the top of their game and turned their talents into a bizarre fever dream that derailed an entire publishing initiative. Before Watchmen. This project was doomed the moment DC announced it. The original Watchmen wasn't just a great comic, it was the comic. A self-contained masterpiece that changed how the entire industry viewed superheroes, storytelling, and mature themes. It didn't need sequels, prequels, spin-offs, or expansion packs. It was complete. So when DC decided in 2012, decades later, to pump out a line of prequels, most fans already felt like it was a cash grab disguised as creative exploration. And honestly, that's exactly how it reads. The biggest issue is that Before Watchmen doesn't add anything meaningful to a story that was already perfectly self-contained. Moore and Gibbons built every character in Watchmen with layers of trauma, moral ambiguity, and social commentary that intertwined with the plot. Their backstories were already implied, explored, and deliberately left mysterious, but the prequels try to fill in the blanks that didn't need filling. The result is a bunch of stories that feel smaller, flatter, and way more generic than the original series. Nothing about them deepens the themes of power, politics, paranoia, or human darkness that defined Watchmen. They just expand the page count. And what makes it worse is that the prequels missed the point of what made Watchmen so revolutionary. The original broke down superhero mythology, exposing how messed up and fragile these figures would be in a real world full of violence, war, and corruption. Before Watchmen flips the formula and tries to make them look cool, sympathetic, or traditional. It strips away the satire and intelligence and replaces it with straightforward superhero action. Yes, you get nostalgia, yes, you get fan service, but you don't get deconstruction or philosophy. It feels like someone annotated a Shakespeare play by adding extra fight scenes. Even with top-tier creators like Straczynski, Darwin Cook, Adam Hughes, and others, nothing matched the depth or purpose of the original book. These are talented people who made good comics elsewhere, but here they were working on a project that never should have been touched. The writing tries to imitate Moore's voice without understanding what made his script special, and the art tries to echo Gibbons' style without the storytelling clarity he's known for. So the books look nice, but they feel hollow. Alan Moore has always been vocal about not wanting sequels or extensions, and DC published them anyway to flex ownership of the IP. It felt like DC was milking a masterpiece it didn't fully understand, and because Watchmen is sacred to a lot of people, before Watchmen automatically felt like vandalism. Even people who didn't read the prequels still dislike the idea of them existing. It isn't a disaster, but it's painfully mediocre in a place where mediocrity feels like a crime. It doesn't challenge anything, doesn't elevate anything, and doesn't justify its existence. While Watchmen is bold, transformative work studied for decades, before Watchmen is just comics. Heroes in Crisis. It is one of those DC events that should have been incredible, because the premise is honestly brilliant. Tom King pitched a story about Sanctuary, a secret mental health retreat where heroes could get therapy after trauma. That idea alone had fans hooked. The world's strongest people finally dealing with their emotional damage. That could have been DC's most human, honest story in years. And to its credits, the art by Clayman and Mitch Gerads is absolutely gorgeous, and some individual scenes hit hard, but everything fell apart the moment DC revealed the killer, and it was Wally West. The second fans learned Wally West killed everyone at Sanctuary, the entire event basically detonated. Wally's return in Rebirth 1 was one of the most beloved moments in modern DC history. He symbolized hope, legacy, and everything people felt the New 52 had lost. So turning him into an accidental mass murderer felt like a betrayal. Fans disliked the twist and felt personally attacked by it. Wally West has always been the heart flash, and suddenly DC made him the emotional breaking point of the whole universe. So as you would guess, the backlash was immediate and intense. What made things worse is that the reveal didn't feel earned. The mystery teased deeper, psychological themes, but the final explanation made Wally look reckless, unstable, and widely out of character. His breakdown was framed as a mental health crisis, but instead of feeling empathetic, it came off like the story was using trauma as a plot device. So it felt like the event wasn't actually about healing, it was about shock value disguised as depth. Even fans who liked King's writing admitted the twist simply didn't fit the character or the tone DC had built around him. Another issue is how the story treated dead heroes. Characters like Lagoon Boy, Blue Jay, and Arsenal were killed almost casually, and their deaths barely served the plot beyond fueling the mystery. That added to the feeling that Heroes in Crisis was mishandling its own message. A book about psychological care shouldn't feel careless about the people it's writing off. Even with all this, there are defenders of the book. Some people genuinely enjoyed the poetry of the dialogue, the confessional-style sequences, and the attempt to dig into hero psychology in a more adult way. And visually, the series is stunning. Several panels became instant favorites online, but the Wally twist overshadowed every single good element. Fans didn't forgive it then, and they still bring it up now whenever DC mishandles legacy characters. So Heroes in Crisis became a textbook example of squandered potential. It was a story that could have reshaped DC's approach to trauma and character development, but one controversial choice destroyed the goodwill instantly. Wally West went from symbol of hope to symbol of editorial missteps, and the event went down in history as one of DC's most divisive modern stories. Great concept, beautiful art, interesting moments, but one twist was enough to turn the whole thing into a disaster for fans. The Dark Knight Strikes Again. This comic had the impossible job of following a masterpiece, and honestly, it shows. The Dark Knight Returns is one of the most important comics ever made, so when Frank Miller announced a sequel almost 15 years later, the hype was unreal. Fans expected another gritty, sharp, revolutionary reinterpretation of Batman, something that would shake the genre all over again. Instead, DK2 dropped like a strange fever dream. It technically continued the story, but tonally it felt like a completely different universe written by someone who only vaguely remembered what made the first one work. Right from the first issue, the story feels weirdly disjointed and rushed. Instead of the tight, emotionally grounded plot of the original, Deikeichu jumps all over the map with political satire, superhero rebellions, Lex Luthor's corrupt regime, and Batman training former villains into freedom fighters. It sounds cool, but the execution is all over the place. The narrative doesn't really start until the second issue. Characters pop in and out with no weight, and major plot points feel like afterthoughts. It's like Miller had a million ideas and tried to cram them all together without giving any of them the space to breathe. And then there's the art. The main thing fans still roast to this day. Miller's style had changed dramatically by the early 2000s, but Deikeichu took it to an extreme. The artwork is chunky, exaggerated, distorted, and often outright bizarre. Anatomy goes out the window, faces look different from page to page, colors are neon and muddy at the same time, and the splash pages, instead of delivering big cinematic moments, they often feel like they exist just to stretch the page count. A lot of readers describe the whole book as looking unfinished, like Miller turned in rough drafts and nobody questioned it. And the comic doesn't feel meaningful the way the original did. The Dark Knight Returns changed the way the entire industry viewed superhero storytelling. It was a mature, grounded, character-driven reinvention of Batman. Deikeichu feels loud, chaotic, and strangely hollow. It tries to expand the world by including Superman, Flash, Wonder Woman, Plastic Man, and others, but none of them get the depth or nuance that made the first iconic. So it becomes a messy political cartoon wrapped in a superhero event comic, without the emotional punch that made its predecessor timeless. Deikeichu is remembered as the moment critics began seriously reevaluating Miller's later work, noticing how different it felt from his 80s and early 90s storytelling. The bold experimentation and offbeat style didn't land for most readers. It came off more like self-parody than evolution, and in the end, The Dark Knight Strikes Again isn't the worst comic ever made, but as a sequel to one of the greatest stories in the medium, it was basically doomed. It's a confusing project that feels more like an alternate universe curiosity than a real continuation. Some fans enjoy it for its wild energy, but most view it as a huge drop in quality that never came close to matching the brilliance of the original. Yes, it didn't ruin The Dark Knight Returns, but it definitely proved that lightning doesn't always strike twice.